This will really put the pressure on me then. So basically, what we started kind of towards the end of last year was, getting something together for our data platform here. Excuse me. Apparently my daughter's going to sneak down here during presentation. Doesn't come down during work, but no. All right, so yeah, we started looking at different things. Snowflake's been on my radar for a long time. Coming to this group, we've had them in a couple of times, and looking at everything, it was a lot of what we wanted to get out of it, and it being cloud-based was important too. So without further ado, so just about Boldt. So Boldt was founded in Appleton here in 1889, so we've been around for a solid 130 years. We were right downtown initially, and today we're just on the north side a little bit. We're on the fourth generation now, and we actually became employee owned recently, so I'm still headquartered here in Appleton. We've grown to basically $1 billion a year company now, so we're nationally ranked contractor with more than 2,000 employees. We're in a variety of different industries, as you can see below. We have 14 office locations across the country, and our largest industry is healthcare, where basically half of our work is from. And we're involved in stuff from small rural clinics all the way to the huge complex $1 billion mega hospitals they're building out west and stuff. So one of the things that kind of allowed me to pursue this project is this idea of bold thinking that we have at Boldt, where it's part of our continuous improvement and lean culture that we've formed here, and we basically use those lean techniques to drive value from everything, construction projects all the way through to projects we implement at the corporate level. So basically the whole assumption is we're driving value to our customers. So I work specifically on the emerging technologies team, where we're a little bit of a unique group within Boldt, as well as kind of just in my experience with meeting all you guys from other companies and stuff too. So we basically have a whole department dedicated to just implementing and running with new and emergent technologies. A few years ago, we started the transition to Office 365, and that's really when the group kind of took off. And we've been moving as much as we can to the cloud. We've got a data center on site that we have a lot of virtual stuff, but everything new is going to the cloud. That's kind of the direction we're going. So I'm involved heavily in really any project we do within cloud and data. So I've also worked on our new ERP implementation a lot over the last year.
Are any of these people in the meetup right now, or just you?
I'm not sure. I didn't hear anybody on your introductions. I know Bjorn was going to try to make it. So.
All right.
As far as why we were going down this road, so I mean, I'm not going to go through any crazy statistics about big data, because you hear those all the time. But basically, there's a lot of data out there right now, and in another 10 years, there'll be exponentially more. So, and construction was generally behind a lot of sectors, but that is changing quite fast as mobile and cloud becomes huge, because one of the challenges always was, with data being, or with construction projects being remote locations and all over the place, getting the technology and tools out to collect that data was always difficult. So basically, as this has come along, company leadership recognized to stay competitive, we had to become more data driven. And below here on the slide is actually a quote I got from my CFO, which is actually a really good quote, perfect for kind of what our approach has been and what we're trying to implement all this. I mean, the idea is empowering our users. That's basically the bottom line. So here's some actual stats. So in 2016, KPMG did a survey of construction companies, and they could only identify 8% of the almost 200 or over 200 people that they surveyed, and these were larger companies. So only 8% of them could be considered cutting-edge visionaries. Only 20% had a single fully integrated project management information system, and only 25% responded that they used advanced data analytics for project-related estimation and performance measuring. So the biggest reason for that is some of the things I cited before, and then just, conservatism within the industry and just complex data across, all the different projects. You have different sizes, different scopes, different industries, complex, simple, all the different things that make it difficult to apply a lot of the data techniques that are used in other industries like e-business and some of the more standard transactional industries. So this is a project we actually just did recently with all the COVID stuff going on. I included it because it's one of the cooler things I've seen. So we just started rolling these out a few weeks ago, actually, but it's called Stat Mod, and it's a basically portable airborne isolation room. So they can be shipped anywhere in the country, assembled. We actually make them at our corporate office here in Appleton, and then they're all prefabricated and ready to go, and then they ship them out. But they put that together in just a handful of weeks and got started on construction right away, and were able to ship them fast enough that people were actually able to use them. And so they designed all that in virtual reality with actual trained hospital staff. So, and using 3D modeling in order to make that possible. So there's a tremendous amount of data that goes into that, and there's a tremendous amount of data that comes out of projects like this. So to maximize all of that value, the first step is getting it somewhere that's centrally accessible. So as far as challenges that we had previously, and I mean, we continue to have some of them, are a lot of the same challenges everybody has. We had an AS400 ERP system for more than the last 30 years before this. So, I mean, we hadn't changed anything with our ERP until we started about 5 years ago and went live last year. Data was literally everywhere. I mean, construction has always collected plenty of data, timesheets, safety data. It's just that it's not in some sort of system that you can get at easily. A lot of it's in Excel spreadsheets. Project managers will keep track of their own stuff just for the project they're working on. And there's not really a consistent data structure either between all these different systems. So, and all of that combines to create a resistance to any sort of new technology you bring in, and just changing stuff in general. So, I mean, if it's too difficult for them to do, they're not going to do it. So some of the things we did, we started the One Boldt program, which isn't just specific to technology. It actually applies, it's everything we do, volunteering in the community, just as we come together as a company, but it's also been applied in technology as far as, using the same processes, using the same systems, using the same, policies and procedures. So we started with a new modern construction focused ERP. So as I said, we started that journey about 5 years ago. Around the same time we started the migration to Microsoft 365, where we are now, we actually have our central hub of communication through SharePoint Online. We have about 900 Power BI licenses, Power Apps through Office 365 with that too. I've done lots of work with that myself. Power Automate, which was Flow. Still getting used to calling it something different. And then Teams, we actually completely switched everybody over to Teams last November, which came in handy, obviously, with everything that's going on now, and really been a huge thing for us to have converted everybody. And then also we implemented a single standard estimating system. So it's one of those things that was on that slide before. We also have, there's been a huge push for, along with Power BI, is the self-service idea. So, and that's kind of where I came from. So I was an accountant before this. My last job was as a corporate controller for a trucking company. So, I mean, the reason why I'm in BI, the BI space, is because of self-service, and it just kind of spread from there. So, definitely a huge proponent of it. So as far as, choosing the tools, why we chose Snowflake, I mean, it was based on, all the demos I saw, everything they advertise. You don't have to go far really to find plenty of, comparisons of that between SQL, Azure, Synapse now they call it, and um, like Amazon Redshift, some of those other ones. So this was, I mean, unlike, especially with Azure, I mean, most of that stuff was lifted from the on-premise, legacy type things, and they're, bringing in new features and stuff for the cloud. But Snowflake was built specifically for the cloud, so it never existed anywhere else. So everything they did took advantage of everything you could do in the cloud. It's scalable, elastic, and that means basically it gets as big as you need it to be anytime you need it. And the performance and security is, what you'd expect from any cloud provider, really. And that makes it low maintenance and low administration, which is a big thing for us because, we have a cross-functional team that we have some administrators, but we got a lot of different systems going on, data warehouse and just our data platform in general. Don't want to have a whole bunch of administration burden on that. That's going to keep it out of the hands of the users who need it. And then the bonus features that they always talk about, the time travel and the zero copy clones, those are things you won't find anywhere else to an extent. And I've actually used both of them, and I'll talk about a little bit more about that later. But then it's low cost because you're only paying for it by the minute when you need it. So we actually run everything in the mornings, early mornings, about 3 in the morning. So it loads everything, does all the transformation, loads the Power BI report, so it's ready to go for the day, and then it shuts down. So the rest of everything we're doing is we're using Matillion for data integration, and I'll actually do a little bit more of a demo of what we're doing with Matillion because that's as important as Snowflake really in kind of the model we implemented. So, and we are a Microsoft shop generally for everything else. So Azure's our cloud, Power BI is the visualization tool, and then Pandata worked with us as our implementation partner. The business dimensional modeling was a huge thing for me, just from really wanting it to be self-service, where focus is centered around the business and putting in terminology they can use and understand and apply that makes it, the ability to be self-service. So then this last 10 weeks has been basically a pilot of what we could do. So we had a meeting in December last year with all the people on this slide here. We had the CFO, the COO, the director of IT, and then some business people and Bjorn to help. And we just talked through, what does it mean to be data driven? What do we want from a cloud service? And all of that stuff that goes along with it. So, I mean, we got together and spent a day with Snowflake, with Pandata, all in the same room, went through everything, mapped out. We had a whole list of reports from the COO that he was looking for out of the ERP that we were going to lift and put in to Snowflake. So that was the map for the pilot. So then with holidays and everything, we got the plan finalized, we put everything together, and then February 18th of this year was our kickoff meeting where we actually started everything. And because we had everything set up and ready to go, we were actually moving data that first day, loading about 12 tables. And then I spent about the next week, and I'll show this in my demo a little bit, creating a Matillion job that could load all of our tables out of our ERP using the primary keys out of the data dictionary, or just loading them blank. Could do it incrementally or as a fresh, complete refresh. So by week 2, basically, we had the entire ERP system almost loading in the Snowflake every night so that we could work uninterrupted on a fresh copy of the data. So, and then we spent the next several weeks putting together the model, planning it out. We had the list of reports from the COO. We had the data model mostly mapped out, so we had to, build the tables, build the transformations, get the ELT running. So, and then basically by week 10, which was a few weeks ago and is continuing to go on now, I've been working on the Power BI piece of it. I'll just show kind of that final model that we created in Power BI. And then basically we're using about 3 credits a day to do all the development, all of the loading. So, and you can look on Snowflake's website as far as how much that costs, but it's not much. So, and then we have Matillion also set up to, it just turns on at 3 o'clock in the morning and then shuts off at 4:30. So we set all that up in Azure with an automation job. And then when I'm developing in it, I just turn it back on. And then at 4:30, if I forgot to shut it back off, it shuts itself off. So it sends me a little reminder that it's still, or that it is going to shut down, and I can extend it if I need to. So it's all to control the costs, and it's worked out really well from a cost standpoint for sure. But obviously, you still get all the power of Snowflake and Matillion with it. So as far as what it was like, the documentation is really good for Snowflake and Matillion. I mean, they have everything clearly, like all the functions, all the capabilities documented, setup is documented. Azure has some of their own stuff for getting it set up. So we used their documentation to get the environment set up and everything. So I mean, it's all out there. Obviously, they're encouraging cloud, and they know it's pretty popular. So, and then on top of that, I mean, it's not complicated. Snowflake is SQL, so just like any other SQL-based engine, if you can write SQL, you can write in Snowflake, although there is some additional analytics function, like specific functions that really actually save quite a bit of time for me anyways. The performance is great. I mean, working with Pandata was good because we had everything set up to be remote. So we had them remoting into our network, remoting into the environment, setting everything up. So working with us, and we did that through Teams too, so could chat with them whenever. And we would have meetings just ad hoc. But and then I said it's been incredibly affordable, so there hasn't been any concerns there. In an administration level, it's much easier. So, I mean, we worked with Azure SQL in the past, and we've worked with several other things too. I mean, administration can definitely be a burden when you're talking about SQL Server. There's DBA type things. I'm not a DBA, and we don't have one, so it was always kind of a challenge to kind of figure out some of that stuff. Snowflake is much easier. It's more straightforward. They definitely take advantage of being cloud-based. They integrate right with Azure Active Directory with us, so we got all that set up right away. And that's how myself and Trevor and Bjorn, we log in using Active Directory, so I have them mapped to a sandbox database for developing their stuff. And then also the zero copy cloning and time travel, as I said, we already use those. So zero copy cloning allows you to just every day when our job runs and updates all the tables out of the ERP, it automatically creates a clone into a sandbox environment where we can create stuff that, like, if people need to get at data now, we can spin stuff up in the sandbox and analyze it without putting extra burden on the source system. But it loads the table, clones it, and it doesn't take any extra storage because it's actually pointing at the same metadata on top. So, I mean, any changes you make can result in a little extra storage, but it's negligible. And then time travel. So the first week when we first started loading, we were doing trunk loads. So we were truncating the table and then loading the new data. And of course, one night the ERP went down. So the job ran and truncated first and then loaded the ERP data, which you couldn't connect. So nothing loaded. So we had empty tables when I came in. So I just cloned it back to as of 12 hours before, and we had our data back. So it was super convenient. And I've actually used it to create clones for other stuff too. So it's really easy to do. Like all their commands are pretty easy. I mean, it's not as nearly as much syntax to try to keep track of from an administrative perspective. We have 2 other users already using it. As I said, they've both looked at Matillion. Bjorn's actually created a couple things in Matillion to move from our Azure SQL into Snowflake. Trevor's been developing stuff directly over our ERP data, stuff that we had running in other systems. So, I mean, we're jumping right into it. As far as where we're going with this, so I mean, I know it's only been like 14 weeks now 13 weeks since we turned it on. But I mean, I've been working on it myself at least 30 hours every week since then, and most of the time more. So I've done a lot of different things. I've done ad hoc stuff, created reports, kind of all that. I've stress tested it. I've run something when we were doing the trial, we had tons of credits left over for the trial. So I spun up their largest sized warehouse and just tried to make it work, and I couldn't. So nothing with anything I'm running anyways. As far as why that's important is, we're looking at using Snowflake as our enterprise single source of truth. The old thing that everybody's trying to get with their enterprise data warehouse. I don't like to call it a data warehouse because we're not. It's a data platform. We're going to be using it for, there'll be some data warehouse type stuff in it, but it's also anything data related. That's kind of going to be where it lives. So it's our platform for all of our data projects. And then, we're going to be getting into the enterprise data governance. That's been an issue we've had. A lot of you guys have probably heard me complain about it at meetings, but now we're going to map it out and get things identified, because if we want to have self-service data, the end users need to be able to get at it and be able to use it. So data governance is key with that. And the reason why self-service is so important to us is the model. From an IT perspective, we want to be more decentralized. We want to have embedded developers and analysts within the departments, analyzing their data, creating reports, doing a lot of the thing with our centrally located layer of governance over the top of it. So we would create models, pass those along to analysts and developers within the teams. And then, with having a well-performing data platform, we can start to look at things like predictive analytics. We can start looking at streaming, because that's going to be a big thing within construction, is all the IoT sensors and things living out on project sites, tracking everything, even from entries to sites and temperatures and weather data, all that stuff. The potential for streaming analytics is going to be big. So we believe we have something built for all of that. So as far as lessons learned, I mean, I've learned some lessons doing this project that are more data related, but most of the stuff on this list that they're lessons we learned over the last year and a half that I've been working with cloud stuff. I mean, there's so many different things out there. You can't be afraid to just try stuff, fail fast, If it doesn't work, pick something else. I've been looking at data modeling tools now, and so just set something up, do a trial, look at it. If it doesn't kind of act like you want it to, you just start over. So we do a lot of automation with everything. We have a PowerShell guru on our team, so he built the automation script.
You cut out there. What guru?
PowerShell.
PowerShell. Okay.
Yeah, he can automate most of the stuff we need him to. So someday maybe I'll learn PowerShell, but I don't know. Then also, starting small allows you to win small. So like with this project, we started with it was a sizable list, but it was kind of contained within data we've already worked with. We had a pretty good understanding of, well, I did anyways. So it's the data I've been working with for the last probably 6 months, 7, 8 now, probably. So, we started with a manageable project, and so that's why we're able to move so quickly and really test this out. And now we're building some other stuff. And knowing your data, I'm coming from the business side. I started not knowing the technical side and knowing the data more, and so now I'm switching to being more the technical side. Knowing your data is still just as important. So it's one of the things that a lot of people tend to struggle with if you do, because learning the technical side of it, to me, I think is easier than knowing the data as well as your business users do. So in some cases you need those business users to really fill in the blanks. So you got to ask those right questions to the right people and find those right people. So that's one of the things I had to do when I first started. So now I'm gonna reshare out here and actually go through some of our actual pieces of the architecture here. And at this point, if anybody's got any questions, you can just kind of shout them out and I will field them as I'm showing here. Find my teams. Here it is. Oh, that's not the right one. So many windows open. All right. So this is, I wanted to start with this one because this is kind of the core of Matillion. This is one of the more complicated transformations I've built so far. It kind of has all your different pieces. So like this here is a lead and lag function. I'm looking back at previous rows to get more data. Filtering, obviously, a calculator is kind of their catch-all for any functions. And then like all of this is resulting in building, there's an aggregation happening here, there's windowing going on here. So and then basically this builds a view, which then these views filled in go into this transformation job here, which actually builds part of our model. So this is our billing details fact table in our model. And so it uses those views to build the transactions. The reason the data that comes out of our ERP system is structured obviously for transactions, and so there was a heavy amount of transformation, especially in this one, that went into making this analytics ready. And also because we just went live, we had a lot of converted data and there was differences between it. So a lot of things come into play, and we've never had a data warehouse before, so I'll put that out there too. This is first going into it, so everything mostly up to this point has been over either the source system or an Azure SQL, and it's been much more difficult to work with. So we create these tables. We have 12 dimensions and 3 fact tables going on in this model. And then this is, I wanted to show this because this is where things get interesting with Matillion specifically. So when I was talking about the automating of the runs, so here we got, these are called iterators, and there's 2 different types of loads. We either clean stage the tables or we delta stage or incrementally load them. So the smaller tables, we just clean stage them every night. And so there's just a list of tables in here. I believe there's 135 of them. I just queried the data dictionary, pulled in all our list of tables, with a certain row count, and pulled them in here so that runs through there. And then our incremental tables, the larger ones, I queried the data dictionary and pulled in the table name and the primary keys that went along with them and popped them into this table here. So these variables are kind of important to running it, but these are the primary keys, the keys on the prefix. We have, I don't know that you could say this will apply to every structure of your data you have, but ours has a consistent structure between tables, at least, where they all have a prefix for the columns. They have the similar column names. They have an updated, a last updated, and last created date field, timestamp. I call them watermarks. And it goes through, and I have some Python scripts that run over it. So this actually queries back to Snowflake and gets the latest updated and created dates. And then it goes into here, and you can just put a Python script directly in here. So what I'm doing is parsing those variables that come through the table, and it goes through and it generates a copy of this job for every row in that table I created, uses those variables to generate the scripts to load the data. And so it just runs through, there's 56 of these incrementally loaded tables, and then 135 of the clean stage tables. And that runs every morning, loads about around 10 or 11 gigabytes now, and it takes about a half hour. So, and it runs it all in parallel. So, and loads it directly in the Snowflake stage we set up in Snowflake. And yeah, it takes about 30 minutes, whereas we had Azure Data Factory running into Azure SQL. And I mean, the features were a little bit more limited, so it's not exactly an apples to apples, but it was taking us over 90 minutes a day just to load a small part of these tables. So we definitely got a huge benefit there, just loading. So after that, we load raw data directly into our stage area, and then we do all our transformations over the raw data. So the idea, when I talked about using this as our kind of enterprise data governance tool, I mean, everything we put in here from a source system is going to go in the source structure. So Matillion actually, just the architecture of Matillion, it lives on, I mean, it's a Azure VM, but it actually just generates code that executed directly on Snowflake. So behind all of these jobs running, there's Snowflake SQL that's generated and executed using Snowflake's compute. So it's, I mean, it scales and, horizontally and vertically, just like Snowflake. So whatever jobs we're loading, transformations we're doing, it can scale just like Snowflake. So that's kind of the
was there a
nuts and
big
bolts of it.
impact? Was there a big impact for you, Nick, when making those tables do incremental loads in terms of how much time it would have taken if you had not, just done dump and load?
Yeah, I mean, we saved probably, because we were doing clean stages initially, and it does run. It's not a lot because it's doing it all in parallel. But So at night, if it runs during off hours, it only saves maybe like 15 minutes. But if you tried to run an incremental load or a clean stage of all the tables during like active hours when it's running, I mean, it'll take probably 2 hours to run through the whole thing versus a half hour.
Sure, thanks.
That's just
Was there any difference in Snowflake also doesn't charge per space, it charges per amount of transactions, right? Was there anything notable there?
Well, I mean, it's time. So it's just strictly time. So the warehouse turns on, runs for the 30 minutes while it's loading, and then shuts down. So you pay for those 30 minutes basically.
Sure.
And then for the hour and a half that Matillion is spun up. So, I mean, we have that automated to turn on, shut down, and I get a notification if it fails, and then I can run it during the day. And because we're doing incremental, I can get by for the most part. You know, running an incremental load takes about a half hour to do the incremental versus the 2 hours, which was because that was one of our constraints when we were working with Azure SQL is, you know, if we had to change something or look at something during the day without having a full copy of our data, anytime we tried to load anything and it was hitting, we've had lots of speed issues with our ERP, and a lot of times that resulted in kind of the finger getting pointed back our way that, you know, running a load was taking a long time on the server, and that was probably the reason why it slowed down, even though I have a hard time believing that. But it definitely doesn't help having stuff running live. But
sure,
by having this all loaded during the night, you know, it's just a full copy of our ERP. So if we want to develop or create anything, even if we were going to push it back to run live over the ERP, we can use the same code because we're copying the same table names, the same field names, everything.
Nick, I have a question for you. This is Nicole.
Sure.
Does Matillion have a data lineage documentation?
Yes, and that is awesome. I'll show that on this one because I actually used it quite a bit in trying to sort through all this. So here, like if I just pick this part of the job, so you can pick any one of these, and you have to do the enterprise. It's an enterprise feature, so you have to. It's like twice the cost basically, which isn't much to begin with. So you go in here and you can just choose a column. So any of these columns that are generated as part of this component here. So if I wanted to see where, let's look at something that's being transformed. So like it's generating the year of the post date here, so I can get lineage.
Because what you did there was first got the lineage of the table and then found a column, then got the lineage of the column. Is that how this is working?
Yeah, well, and so you can actually use it though. You choose a column, but it really doesn't matter. So what happened here? So when you hit the view SQL, so it highlights that specific column that I chose, and you can see where it's coming from, all the different components. So this is actual Snowflake SQL code. But I mean, what I've done to troubleshoot some things that's past is just copy this whole statement here, pull it into Snowflake, and try to figure out, you know, where something maybe isn't doing a calculation I intended it to do. Especially when I don't do it so much now that I'm more comfortable with Matillion, but when I was first learning it, I did a lot of that. Just because naturally, when you're used to coding SQL, you always want to check the code. But also too, Snowflake keeps track of every query that runs on it. So even though this is happening in Matillion, there's the full history of this back in Snowflake as well. So, but like you can track, so that specific column, as I said, I mean, it's just showing you where it came from the post date, ran this function year of the post date as post year. I mean, it's not, this is a simple one, but like if you wanted to look at the actual final view and see one of the columns that I'm calculating throughout this whole, I mean, this is being joined here. There's a view being created here, which is then being further calculated on, joined here, and then additional calculations. So if you're somebody who needs to understand where that data came from and where it's going, this lineage part is probably one of the better things I've seen to be able to do that. I mean, I can't say I have a ton of experience with a lot of stuff, but it's definitely helpful.
Does that answer the question, Nicole? I'm
Thank you.
part of what I'm wondering about is when I think lineage, I think more of some kind of historical view tracing back to source type examples.
Well,
not
and
kind of
it's
just an SQL view.
Yeah.
And
This
it
is
has,
that's what I'm looking for is the lineage from source to final target and everything that happens to it on the way.
yeah, and so this one isn't the best example because this isn't a source here, but generally it's because I pulled this view off of our ERP, something we already had created, so I didn't want to recreate everything. But generally what I'm doing now going forward is, I mean, this stuff gets broken out, so like this is a source table. But you'd be able to then track the columns, like you can see some of the columns
Yeah,
come
because
from
I'm
here.
kind of wondering, like at the end there, like you're at the end point, and you had a column. Would you know if it came from the JCBell source or the vbuild data source?
Yeah, well, and it'll be tricky to tell because I'm joining them and then doing a merge, so they kind of come from both. But I have, looked at simpler ones where I'm just doing calculations through the whole thing. And yeah, I mean, you can see exactly what calculation is happening at each stage in the thing, and it's super helpful. I mean, less so for me because I wrote it, but if somebody had to look back and try to understand it, that's, where you could, if you're familiar with SQL, you could actually peel that apart. They also have a generate job documentation that you can do with this that gives you some, it's somewhat helpful if you do your notes good. So I'm just starting to kind of go back through and add notes. But there's things I gotta, figure out from an architecture standpoint, how we're gonna document things exactly. So right now I'm doing most of our model development. We have other people doing development just ad hoc. But there's certainly things we gotta work on from that standpoint. And as we get more developers, working on these tools we set up. The other thing too is so you have the lineage through here. So Power BI up, I mean, this is the final model. So I'm sort of I tried some different data modeling tools. I haven't been super impressed with what I've gotten. So, I mean, this is kind of what I'm using for now. I mean, these are all of our dimensions. Up here, these are the fact tables. This is an Excel spreadsheet that's being merged with it. And then the time dimension in here. So you could go back here from this, find that corresponding Matillion job that results in those tables, and then follow the lineage back from there. That's at a developer level then at that time. So that's where I was talking about. We have that kind of enterprise data governance layer over it. And then this is kind of the self-service layer we present to our users to be able to interact. And they would be doing through Power BI most likely, but with Snowflake, it's so easy to give them access and limit. You can do, they call secure views through it. So you can create a view and give them access even at a role level to just that view. Without having to give them access to all the underlying views, because that's always the issue we've run into with Azure SQL. So I mean that's nice. So you can do future grants, which are pretty cool. So that's how it's basically a grant over a certain schema, and then anything that gets added or created in that schema, they have future rights to already. So we have, like, I kind of have some of that stuff already mapped up more than I have some of the documentation pieces, but.
So would you say your self-service is more in line with people going back to Snowflake to serve their data, or are your
Yes.
Power BI models where people start?
We're looking at both. So the Power BI models will be kind of a more ready source. So I already so these are all our measures, our KPIs running over all these facts. So I'm pre-creating all those. So then really, I mean, somebody would be able to take this whole model and build quite a few reports off of it. And I have a list of reports that I'm going to be building off of it. And then the other part of it is, so all of these are underlying tables that if somebody is capable enough of building, even getting to this point, we could give them access directly to these tables in Snowflake, and so that they could, create, maybe they want to use certain dimensions in other fact tables once we expand this and have more going, that they'd be able to grab, pieces here, pieces there, if they can write their own SQL. I mean, we definitely want to encourage that. We're not trying to discourage anybody from doing their own their own building of reports and stuff with that data governance we put over the base facts, so that if they need to, troubleshoot anything with us, we'll be able to kind of follow their work or whatever. And also, I mean, having that ability within Power BI, everything they would publish through Snowflake would be through Power BI as of right now. I mean, that's going to be the reporting tool. So with Power BI's ability to certify data sets, that's going to be a key too. So, giving people access to build whatever they want, but then not necessarily publish, or notifying them that something's not certified to be able to, ready to use, that kind of model that other people have presented in this meetup. So,
Are you using certified data sets or certified features of Power BI?
well, right now we're not, because there's only like 3 of us that actually create Power BI. So there
Nick,
isn't.
I got a question. So, like, does Snowflake compute need to be up if you were going to do that, though?
Nope. So we're doing imported data sets. So
Right.
yeah, if somebody was accessing it directly, yes. So that's the part. When we get to that point, there's going to be a concerted effort between all of us to figure out how the policy part of that works. Also, I mean, Snowflake has the ability to, you can create as many warehouses as you need to kind of govern that part of it. So I can spin up a warehouse specifically for a certain group, and then limit the consumption that they can use on that, just to keep them from running away with cost and stuff. So
like, this report that you have now, does it have to like do its import in your window before you shut things down?
I just have it, when I publish it, I set it up to refresh, like an hour after everything finishes in Snowflake. So it refreshes that one time after the full load every night. Because that's the only time right now that we're updating data. If we get to the point where data's being refreshed more frequently, then there's things we got to figure out there too. But otherwise, it just refreshes that one time, and then that's where, like Paul was saying before, if we have people connecting directly to Power BI, we can have them connect directly to the model we already published.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, at that point, Snowflake's giving us no benefit at that point, right? Because Power BI is having the horsepower at that point. But it's, the ability for Snowflake to capture data from all of our source systems, do the transformations, do that one-time crunching, as fast as we need it to, and then be done, and that's all we pay for. That's the benefit in my mind.
Right.
You could schedule that twice a day, right? You could, kick it off middle of the day for like an hour. Takes 30 minutes to run. Is that correct? Or
Yeah, I mean, we could. I would want to be. I wouldn't want to refresh the entire thing at that point. So one of the things we've talked about is if we go to the point where we have. I'll stop sharing now so that we can see each other. If we get to the point where we're publishing stuff out, and we want to have something refresh during the day, like we could create, a midday refresh job on Matillion. And Matillion has an API which you can actually trigger. So one of the things I've talked to Bjorn about doing, because he's doing a bunch of web app work, do we get to the point where they spin up a web application, refresh a data set, go into an already filtered data set directly from like a web application, and get a Power BI report refreshed off of that. So both using the Matillion API and the Power BI API.
I got to say this, since Dave Dunst isn't here, none of this would work with Click.
I can't
I had to
comment
get
on
that
it.
in.
I don't know about it, but yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, Power BI, we have a good handle on that part of it. The learning Snowflake and Matillion part was new to us, and we haven't done anything with data warehouse. So, I've used a lot of the things I've picked up here, which is a huge plug for this meetup. So,
I have a question.
But it actually does work with Power BI. That's amazing.
Yeah. So,
Come on, Dave. How much wine have you had?
Yeah, well,
Nearly enough, buddy. You should be here with me.
the best
I
part
wish I
is,
was.
so I didn't even know this going into it, but just in January, they updated the Snowflake connector so that now it works pretty seamlessly with Active Directory. Before, it was a little bit more challenging. I had thought it just kind of worked that way, but yeah, now with the new connector, it works great. I mean, basically, you could give somebody access, they sign in on Power BI Desktop with their Active Directory credentials, and they only get access to what they have access to. So they can freely connect to and create whenever they want. So
how does it work with the data flows? Is there any advantage to pulling those in during the refresh period, or?
I haven't looked at it enough with data flows.
Okay.
We
have
just create
self-service
the model.
users.
Yeah.
Okay, you create the model, but we have self-service users that pull things in. We've set up data flows. Obviously, there wouldn't be any impact to usage of Snowflake during those time periods if it's pulled in directly into a data flow.
Yeah, I mean, it's auto suspend and auto resume. So basically, it's just sitting there inactive. As soon as you issue a query, you don't have to do anything like turn it on. It just picks up that query and starts running. And then basically, we have it set up. And the default is like 5 minutes, but you can actually just create one automatically, or create one yourself that has a 1 minute auto suspend. So like, especially you don't necessarily want to do that with things that are being queried frequently, because then you lose every time it suspends, you lose your cache and all that stuff, and it's got to kind of rebuild that. I mean, with the size of our data sets, it's not a huge concern. I mean, it might cost us like a couple extra seconds at the beginning, but it's not a big deal. But basically, somebody queries it, it turns on. If they haven't asked it anything in a minute, it shuts down. So as I'm developing, I mean, I've been in there a lot the last few weeks, and I've only used, I think, 15 credits total. So it's like $50.
Wow. So it's querying coming in and coming out, right? So if you're querying from, say, for example,
Yes.
Power BI directly, but if you actually you load these into almost 200 tables, right? You
Yeah.
said, when you said the whole ERP, I was thinking, oh yeah, he's just a functional area. When you said that, it's probably all areas of your business, right?
Yep.
For your ERP. Okay. So if you loaded those though directly into a data flows instead of into the data lake or whatever, there would be no charge to pull it out, right?
I mean, if you put them into like a data lake, you're saying, instead of,
I guess I
I
don't
mean-
know what you're storing and staging. I'm not familiar with
so,
Snowflakes
all
or
right,
the
so we
data
use Snowflake
services.
stages. So I mean, it's actually turning on Snowflake when it loads. But I mean, the nice thing is, so they separate the compute and the storage. So you can have one compute warehouse running your loading, one compute warehouse doing your querying. They don't even really know that the other one is doing anything, because they're like, your data exists completely. It spins up on whatever machines you spin up with it. So like, I'm loading data here, it's running for a half hour. During that half hour, somebody queries something. If they're not on the same compute warehouse, there's no impact whatsoever. So you can
Okay.
be actively querying data as it's being loaded. And I mean, it keeps track of changes. Obviously, if you have transformations happening and you're refreshing that, they might get a query of a data set that's currently in the middle of being refreshed. But I mean, it's just like any Oracle or really any database. They have those controls built in to
Right.
preserve that concurrency and the consistency or whatever.
Sure.
So
This is Tina. I do
Okay.
have a question. The use of Matillion as an ETL tool versus like using the transformations within Power BI. Did you decide to go the Matillion route because of the robustness of it?
the idea is, if we want to be self-service, we don't want to limit to just being able to create data sets in Power BI, in doing all of, writing the DAX and all that stuff. So we want to get them to tables that are ready to be queried so that they can create their own without having to, really be super DAX users and all that. So, I mean, that's the reason. What we've done up to this point is that, I mean, everything we've done up to this point has been, we query the ERP, we pull the data into Power BI, we write all our DAX, we build kind of the model there, and do all that transformation, and then we publish it to the end user. But we're really trying to drive that self-service thing, and so that's,
But when
we
you say self-service, Nick, I think you're saying in a universe where the people that are self-servicing would also be comfortable getting to tables and doing SQL,
yes.
right? Okay.
So
Yeah, and I
That's
think
when I think about some areas, like I don't know that we are thinking in terms of our self-service audience, giving them anything that really helps too much with that, because we didn't see a self-service audience using SQL. But
yeah, well, and even beyond that, I mean, even if they're just, spinning up Power BI desktop, and they can grab just views or tables of data that's already curated, there's no SQL they have to know, but now they have the ability to create something custom in Power BI. I mean, that's, if you tried to query our source tables directly, I mean, the structure of it is incoherent if you wanted to try to just create a report. I mean, it's transactional based. I mean, I don't even think that excuses everything with it, but I mean, you need to really understand our data if you want to try to query the source system directly. So like, that's just not a viable option for any sort of self-service model. So
They're really not using SQL. They're using the data sets, those models that you're creating in Power BI, correct? And so essentially creating
Yes.
reports against those models, right? So it's really not that level of detail.
no.
no, Nick was also planning them to have access to the Snowflake tables.
Tables
Yes.
direct. Oh, I see.
Yep.
Yeah, for that case.
Yeah,
Okay.
but they're going to be already kind of curated into something usable. So like, all these tables we created, the facts and dimensions and everything, I mean, there's quite a heavy bit of transformation happening between, and I mean, Steph and Chris could attribute to that. There's a lot of views I wrote over stuff. It's, not, if you tried to match that up against a table you're going to find in the ERP, you're not going to, because it's just, hardly resembles it by that point. There's flags and defaults and things, with that data that it's got to ignore certain things in certain situations. It's only got to add things if they meet a certain criteria. Like I don't know how much of it is it just being a poorly built database and how much of it is just the fact that it's a transactional system, but
Right.
there's a combination.
Yeah, you've curated the data, and they're just bringing in the certified data sets of files. So
Yeah.
accessing those files that are been curated and transformed, right? So from the ERP. So it's a little better than directly going into the ERP and pulling that data
Yeah.
directly. So
Hey, Nick, did you, before you got started, did you guys look at Azure Synapse at all? Or do you know much about comparing and contrasting those two?
The biggest thing for us is we were looking to get started fast, and the kind of entry point for Azure, what was SQL Data Warehouse at that point, seemed higher than what we really needed. So we couldn't justify it from a project kind of charter perspective or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Snowflake definitely lets you in the door, and you can try it, run it, see it all without spending hardly any money really, but then you have it for if you need it. So at some point, someday we got to run some super complex query looking at like 5 different source systems. Because we have the data, it's just not, readily available. Outside of our ERP, we have probably, 100 times that amount of data living in our BIM models, our estimating system, all of our different, construction technology tools that, we're not using in any of this that we're doing right now, but we will at some point.
Good. I had thought of a question. Let's see here. When you were back talking about the Snowflake choice and thinking about that in terms of needing a database and needing to put something someplace, how did the existing database investments that the company had, the ERP is running on a database, there must have been other databases, how much did that factor in as you were trying to be like, well, use what we have or invest in something new?
That's one advantage we had because our existing structure was not like, we didn't have a huge infrastructure already. So, we had our AS400, which had been running forever, and that was kind of our, main reporting system. It was our all-in-one. We didn't do anything with anything else. If it wasn't in the AS400, it was an Acceler access. That's how it was.
Okay.
So, as we are going now with this new ERP, it's actually hosted in the ERP vendor's data center, and then we're also looking at moving that to Azure, so that'll be cloud-based. Everything we're looking at is going to be cloud-based, really. They have plans really to make our entire data center cloud-based within the next 5 years. So, that's definitely the direction we're trying to go. And part of that's just the design of our business. It's not right for everybody, but we have 14 offices all over the country with jobs, probably 200. I think we have like 200 and some job sites spread out, and all of them have kind of their own infrastructure there. So they have networking and computers and, project teams running their job functions. Like they need cloud resources. So it's, for us, it's really the only logical choice other than, building and hosting our entire data center. But there's like a certain level where we're not that big, but we're big enough. So the cloud makes sense.
Thanks.
Hey, Nick, I got a question. So what like services in Azure are you using kind of on the perimeter of this, to support it? You scheduling some stuff through Azure Functions and automation. What other kind of things have you got in there?
Yeah, we have a lot of, piece together things So Bjorn's built a few web apps up there now. We had some consultants design some other applications that run through there that do some like workflow type stuff. And then from a data perspective, we have Azure SQL up there that we still have some stuff on that I am working on moving over into Snowflake. But we've also looked at, we've used Azure Data Factory quite a bit. We've done, various other things. I've tried stuff that, didn't
Right, but
work
none of
out.
that stuff. I mean, none of that stuff is actually needed to support your Snowflake implementation, other than like the Azure functions that are using to schedule stuff. Or
yeah. So for this architecture, there's the Azure VM runs Matillion, and
Okay,
that's
yep.
basically just a pre-built box that you get from Azure that's already loaded with Matillion, ready to go. And then we have a storage account with that for if there's certain things that have to run through a storage account before you can get them in Snowflake if you use them. I've done only a handful of those, but like loading Excel. So that Excel table I have in there, in order to get that loaded into Snowflake, I had to use the storage account to first land the Excel in, and then Matillion was able to load it into Snowflake.
You like use Data Factory to pump it into the storage account.
I just put it directly in there. So,
oh, did you?
Yeah.
That is one way to do it.
I did do some early on when before we had spun up Matillion and everything ready to go. I moved a bunch of stuff into storage account first, and we were able to just load that done directly versus having to query the database the first time. So that's kind of what we did to get everything moving on day one. And then like the only other thing, so we have the Azure automation job and the function running to shut it off and on. And then Snowflake just is in their own, it's actually in their tenant. So Snowflake hosts all of their compute, and you just basically create an account with Snowflake. You don't see anything on the Azure side, other than we had to build the integration with Azure Active Directory. So there's a app service or whatever that runs that syncs that all. I didn't set that up, so I can't tell you too much technically about it, but
that's good. That answers the question. I was just curious as to.
Yeah, I mean the footprint's pretty small, so
yeah.
From a Azure service perspective.
Nice. Anyone have any other questions? Feel free to jump in.
I got a question. Is that a Snowflake hat?
It is. Yeah. I just got it today. So.
Is that because you can't get your hair cut for 3 months?
Yeah.
I might be needing one of them.
Well, if you start a Snowflake account, I might send you one. So.
There you go. Or I'll come over and see Paul's wife and get my hair cut.
No, this was me doing it, which was not good.
Oh, I'm not going there. I'll go with Flo before I go there.
This is me doing it without a mirror. Just take up the trimmers. Any other questions? Not about my haircut?
I got some Snowflake socks too, so.
Well, I don't know if we want to go there tonight, Nick, but maybe next time.
I had a question, Nick. Does much of your process to get that clean, curated, and data available involve any tweaks to it that have to be done after it's out of the source system and after it's transformed? Things where an end user has to recategorize or do some master data management?
Not really. Just, I mean, writing measures, but I mean, I built everything, at least for this, at the same kind of level of granularity. So for the most part, it's just some measures for the most part. I'm trying to avoid, so I mean, my theory with Power BI, and when I design stuff, I try to keep everything at the base detail. I don't like pre-aggregating anything, because the first thing anybody always asks, and I know from being the business user on the other side is, I want to drill into that. So I always start with as far as they can drill into, they get that, and then roll everything up from there. So that was one of the big reasons for doing it this way, though, is because in order to do that, it takes a lot of prep work to get it into a structure that Power BI, is friendly with, allowing only the one, column to column joins and all that. So, I mean, Snowflake gives us the ability to build those models designed for Power BI. So, I mean, everything, we rekey everything with in our facts and dimensions, so that I just load it up. It automatically connected everything, so I didn't even have to draw any lines going from one to the other. So,
Hey,
Any other
Nick.
questions?
Yes. I might have missed this during your presentation, but did you mention anything about the overall cost here? I mean, you're talking about several components to go into making this work. Do you have any notion what it might have cost your company, if it's something you can reveal?
yeah, I mean, what we've done so far is like nothing. I mean, we're so low right now. I would guess we're spending maybe like $200 a month right now. Like that's just, but I mean, obviously the future we envision for it is going to be a lot more than that. It's hard for me to forecast that kind of at this point, but I mean, this is going to get us by for a while. It's going to do a lot. So it's definitely, I mean, there isn't much necessary for an ROI perspective as far as justifying it, just because the cost is low, and right away we're going to have, a whole handful of reports running on it. So, but
Does that include your Power BI audience, where you're, the people that are looking at Power BI need Power BI Pro and everything? Yes.
we all have E5 licenses, so I don't really have that's not a constraint. So
Okay. So pretty cheap outside of the E5 considerations.
yes. So yeah,
Good
I mean, you have to take everything in with everything else. So.
Is the Snowflake documentation available on their site?
Yes, and yeah, you can get to it pretty easily. I mean, even just searching Snowflake and some sort of function will get you there. But then it's all broken out. It's all in the same spot. I've had no problem finding the solution